Kia ora koutou, no mai haere mai. Thanks everyone for coming today. This session is just the very beginning of the climate changes conversations with young people. You're really important to the work that we're doing, and we want to have an ongoing and long relationship and also do you justice, because we're part of the reason why we're here. Commission was established after some long and ongoing advocacy from Generation Zero. So respect to Gen Zero and their work, and to all young people who are working in climate change, because it's a tough topic, and we hope that we can do you proud. So the Commission's job is to provide advice to government on what we need to do to reach net zero by 2050 and ensure a thriving and climate resilient Aotearoa. I know there are some adults here in this webinar too, and so can you please we ask that you be active participants rather than observers, but when you ask a question, let us know the organisation that you represent so that we can prioritise the young people. And hopefully you're here to listen as well, and this will help inform some of your work. As I said earlier, my name's Harriet. I'm Principal Advisor in the Comms and Engagement team, which basically means I come up with lots of ideas on who we need to talk to and how we need to talk to them, and try and get all the messages out to the right people, both inside and outside our organisation. Young people are really central to this. I live with an 11-year-old, so I hear on a daily basis about what we need to be doing here, so I'll bring some of his thoughts into the room. I think one of the reasons why we want to include young people in our work is that it's not only that you're going to bear the brunt of the impacts of climate change, but you're the force behind the climate action we've already seen. As I said, we're here because of you. As part of our work, we also need to look at intergenerational equity, which means that we want to make sure that the adults of the future share the same privileges the adults of today. And we don't want to leave the world a mess and ask somebody else to clean up after us. So you're a powerful voice, and we're here to listen. You can force us to think differently and look outside the system, and that's really important for us if we're going to do a good job and we're going to be innovative. So today we're going to look at achieving two things. First, we just want to start to show you who we are and talk about ourselves and what we're here to do. I'm going to introduce you to some of the people who are doing that work. We're really pleased to have some youth adjacent colleagues, and often they've come from a background of youth advocacy for climate themselves, and so hopefully that'll show you, maybe inspire some of you to join us in the future. If you have any feedback on what we're doing or how we're doing it or things you want to hear, please keep putting it in the chat and use the Q&A, because we'll answer your questions. We also want to talk about our work and our vision, and start to understand your vision so that we can incorporate that into ours and make sure that the future we're trying to create is the one that you want to see. So I've already asked everyone, if you've joined late, please put your name and where you come from or the community you represent in the chat. And then I'm going to ask everyone in a minute before handing over to our panel to write one thing that you're looking for in climate action, or what climate change means to you. Maybe panelists, you can start by doing that to show people what you're doing. So with us today, you do that, I'll introduce people. We have Catherine Lining. Catherine's one of our commissioners, so she's part of a group of experts who are guiding the Commission's work. Catherine started out as a youth advocate herself. We have Ben Abraham. Ben, can you put your hand up? He's the one with the penguins in the background. Ben's a senior analyst. He's in our land team. I've asked everyone to give us a fact about themselves so you can get to know a bit about them. And Ben was a zombie extra in a zombie film. Yeah. We have Francisco Hernandez. Francisco, can you wave? He's also a senior analyst, and Francisco's been working on our waste work, so he knows a lot about some rubbish and things that are really important to people. It's a good expert there. His fun fact is he was involved in an anarchist food rescue collective when he was in Dunedin called Food Not Bombs, where he rescued food and served it to students. No food poisoning, apparently. We've got Carly Sue, who's sitting with Charlie there with the kakapo. Carly's also a senior analyst. She's working on understanding the impacts of our advice, so what that means to people. Yeah, can you change it? So Steve's asked, can you change the setting so we can see all of the panelists together instead of one at one time? I think, Steve, that's up to you. Hope, who's our technical expert in the background, she can put some instructions in the chat for you to do that. And Carly's a brown belt in karate. Carly's really little. Watch out. And then we have Charlie Keeling, who's from my team. She's a senior advisor in the comms team. Charlie, can you wave so people know? Yeah. Charlie knows the lyrics to every piece of popular music from the 1960s onwards, including rap. So she's good to have on our team. So I'm just going to ask again if everyone in the chat, if you click on the little speech bubble down the bottom, the single cheek speech bubble, and says adults included, if you could all put something that you want to hear from us or see in climate action, put that into the chat, and then we're going to collate them later and share them. And now I'm going to pass over to Catherine. Over to you, Catherine.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Catherine Lining toko ingoa. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I wish that we could see you like you are seeing us. But it's a great opportunity to start to engage with some of the people in New Zealand for whom we are doing this work. So I'm one of the 7 climate change commissioners, and the Climate Change Commission is going to be celebrating its first official birthday this Wednesday, actually. So we've just been around for a year now. As Harriet mentioned, we're the product of the Zero Carbon Act, and the Zero Carbon Act really had 3 main parts to it. The first is that it put in place a long-term emission reduction target for 2050. So that is to get us to net zero emissions of long-lived gases by 2050 and to reduce our biogenic methanes, that's our methane from agriculture and waste, to 24 to 47% below 2017 levels by 2050. So putting that long-term goal into legislation was a really, really important accomplishment of the Zero Carbon Act. Secondly, it creates a program of work around adapting to the impacts of climate change that we can't avoid. And that's really important in terms of assessing where our risks are and then putting in place plans to address those risks. And then the third element was to create the Climate Change Commission as a source of independent expert advice to the government and hopefully to the people of New Zealand as well on how to accomplish these goals. And so where the Zero Carbon Act sets our target, it actually leaves open how we get there. And we've got lots of options available to us, and those options have implications. So part of what we're trying to do at the Climate Change Commission is to provide advice on how to shape that pathway. How quickly do we make this transition, and how do we do it in a way that creates opportunities for New Zealand that's manageable for the people and that helps to safeguard the climate system for future generations. So those are the types of trade-offs that we're trying to evaluate. And then another important part of our function is to hold the government to account for the actual policies and actions that the government puts in place to meet these targets. So we're really excited about the work ahead. It's a very challenging program of work ahead, and we've got a small but really talented staff of people who are helping us to get there. I wanted to give you just a quick sense of my personal background. So you can tell from my accent, I'm not originally from these here parts. I'm American. I moved here in 2003, and at the time I was living in Washington, D.C. and doing climate change work. I first started doing climate change work in university. I was in university when the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was passed back in 1992, and at that time I took a course on the geology of climate change and started studying some of the literature that was coming out at the time from the likes of Al Gore and Bill McKibben, who are still very active today. And I said to myself, my goodness, we're in this slow motion train wreck. Why isn't anything happening on climate change? We should be doing something about this. And all these years later, I'm still working on this, trying to help find solutions. So I'm really excited to be a part of the commission. One of the really important parts of the commission, though, is that we're a small organization, and actually our goal is not to come up with the answers ourselves, but to listen to the collective wisdom from New Zealanders and from other people overseas about where our pathway should take us. And so that's one of the things we're hoping to get of our engagement, starting with you today, but also in the longer term, is collecting your wisdom on where we want to be heading in the longer term. So, my career itself in New Zealand points to why we need the Zero Carbon Act. I moved here to work on the carbon tax, which we had in place originally to help address this challenge. And then in 2005, there was an election and the carbon tax was stopped. And then I helped to design the emissions trading scheme. And then right after that was passed, there was an election and the emissions trading scheme was changed significantly. And then I became a climate change negotiator at the United Nations level, and was helping to design the treaty that came after the first commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol, and then there was a decision to withdraw. And so there has been this continual cycling of policy and change and policy and change. And what I'm hoping will come out of the Climate Change Commission is that because all political parties will have a strong evidence base to draw from, that we can have continuity in climate policy across elections. So we are very much an independent entity that's there to support all governments and all climate change, all parties with the climate change journey. So on that, I will pass back to Harriet, and I'm looking forward to your questions later on. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. I'll just turn on my video. So now we're going to go through each of the our team members. If anyone's got any questions for Catherine or interested in anything she had to say, you can ask us a question in the Q&A or put it in the chat. We're quite keen to have a bit of a discussion going here. So what I think I'll do is we'll go alphabetically through the team. So we'll go, Ben, if you start, talk about yourself, your work and what you're working on, your vision. And then if you pass to Carly, Carly to Charlie, Charlie to Fran. And I'm going to turn my video off so that people can see everyone else. Cool, thank you.
All right, I guess it's me. Kia ora, everybody. Yeah, my name is Ben, and maybe you can guess from the two beautiful hoiho in my picture here that I grew up and was born in Aotearoa, Dunedin, and that's really my home, although now here in Wellington at the Climate Change Commission. And I'm a senior analyst in the land team, where we look a lot at forestry and agriculture within the scheme of the Climate Change Commission's work. And I guess sort of how I've gotten into this, I've sort of gotten into climate progressively deeper and deeper over the last few years. I grew up in Dunedin and went to Otago University, and I had a study in international relations and international politics, and then became quite interested in issues around conflict and global efforts around poverty alleviation. And as I got into those, I more and more sort of got to see how all of those efforts that tie to these real kind of dramatic manifestations in the present are like tied to the underlying environmental conditions and changes, and that all the progress we might make on dealing with conflicts or access to resources and trying to alleviate poverty could really be undermined by climate change if we don't get on top of that. And so starting to see those connections sort of drew me to it as this kind of root cause underpinning issue. And I also really enjoyed getting into climate because it's sort of connected across both natural sciences and social sciences. And I remember growing up studying, I really liked both, doing science at school as well as, doing history and politics and social sciences as well. Then after I finished up there, I went over to the UK where I did my master's and PhD and started getting more seriously into climate change policy and climate change politics. I did a lot of research during my PhD looking at efforts to try and reduce deforestation globally, and spent a lot of time in South America looking at projects and initiatives in the Amazon there. And then last year as well, I moved to China and was working there to try and get more. I was trying to sort of understand different perspectives because the challenge of climate change should manifest differently in different parts of the world, whether it's air pollution and industry challenges in one place, or forest and protection challenges in other places. And now it's all led me back to New Zealand. I'm really excited to be here and try and bring the knowledge and things that I've learned over the last few years and bring it back home to try and support the work of the Commission. And I guess my vision ultimately is about beginning to, and I sort of typed in the chat, beginning to reconnect our relationship with the whenua, with nature. And that we're not just out there trying to sort of protect or stop something that's out there, but seeing that these challenges from climate change and other environmental challenges are fundamentally related to us, because we depend on nature for our survival, for our culture, for our identity, and that this is about seeing how we are fundamentally tied to this, and that it's not something we're trying to sort of avoid, but we go into this proactively to try and make the future we choose, including the relationship with nature that we choose. So that's kind of part of the motivation that drives me, and excited to chat more with you all during the webinar. So pass it over to the next on the alphabet, Carly.
Hi, kia ora all. My name is Carly Sue. As Harriet said, I'm a senior analyst in the cross-cutting team. So I work specifically at looking at the impacts of our advice. So what does this mean for people? What does this mean for households? And more specifically, what does this mean for young people? And that requires taking a kind of long-term view of the problem, and also looking a bit broader than just the kind of pure economics of the situation. My background, so I've recently come back from London, where I was living there for the past 2 years. I was working on a bunch of environmental and climate change policies there, and before that I was doing my master's in Europe. I was a bit of a travelling master's. I went to Budapest and Greece and Paris and Manchester and learned a lot, and I'm really excited to kind of bring that knowledge back to New Zealand. My background's in climate and environmental policy. I kind of got interested in climate change when I was at uni, and I did a paper, and I think the climate accords were just being discussed when I was at uni, and I was, watching them with great interest, to only see them not do very much. So I've been involved in emissions trading policy, and I was also part of the delegation in Paris for at COP21. So my background's really kind of in this stuff, and I think that for my vision for New Zealand, something I think a lot about is about equity, and I think that for me, having a vision for Aotearoa is based on equity, and based on action, and based on, as Ben said before, like that kind of connectedness between people, and connectedness between nature. And I look forward to your questions. Feel free to fire them away, and we'll endeavour to get to them all, and if not, we'll try follow up. Thank you.
Kia ora, I'm Charlie. So like Catherine, you might be able to tell that I'm not from here either. I'm from the UK originally, but I've lived here for just over 3 years now. I work in the communications and engagement team as a senior advisor, like Harriet said. But I've spent the last few years working in similar roles for projects in government that drive policy change. So my background's not in climate change as much, but I've always really enjoyed working on things that drive change and are making a positive impact. And that's why I'm really excited to be at the Commission, because it's something that's I'm personally really passionate about. So it's cool to learn a lot more about it through the work here. And I have a couple of friends who work in climate change in different areas, both here and in the UK. So it's been good to have some discussions with them about the work. I studied politics at university as well, and I always knew I wanted to work in something where I could make a difference, and that's why I love working in communications and engaging with people, because ultimately people are at the centre of everything that we do. Whatever impacts of climate change happen and what we do to address them, it's going to matter for all New Zealanders. So it's really important that everyone's views are considered and that everyone gets the chance to have their say. So yeah, being part of something where I have to work with a range of different people and making sure they understand what we're trying to do, and listening to what they think about our work while working to deliver something really important is what motivates and inspires me. And I echo what Carly said about equity. That's something I'm really passionate about as well. And I think the fact is it's a global effort and we're all in it together. So I think, yeah, that's just something that I hope that we can do successfully going forward. I'm also looking forward to hearing your questions. Just let us know if you have anything you want to know. I'll pass over to Francisco.
Kia ora everyone, my name is Francisco Hernandez. Like Ben, I went to Otago University. It was there that, I started getting really interested in the intersection between climate change and poverty and other environmental topics when I was involved in Food Not Bombs through rescuing food from supermarkets or partnering with businesses to take their food. We were able to get win-wins. We were able to stop food from going to, still usable food from going to bins, and we were able to, stop students and stop people from who were in need from going hungry. In terms of my role in the commission, I'm the one-person waste team here at the Climate Change Commission. I'm mostly looking at, how we can reduce the waste, but, part of the work involved in the waste team is also looking at how we can make our economies less wasteful. Currently, we have what's called like a linear economy, which is along a take, make, dispose model. So, where because of planned obsolescence and because things are designed to break, we're throwing away more things we need to do, and we're consuming more than we need to do, which is causing unnecessary emissions. And not just the emissions in landfill when the waste breaks down, but there's lots of second order emissions from when you transport unnecessary goods around, and when you make things that people don't necessarily need and will break down in the first place. And I guess that ties into my ultimate vision, which is a circular economy where we use resources efficiently, and also that everyone has enough in need rather than some people monopolizing all the resources and causing a lot of the emissions. I think there was a report that came out earlier in the year that showed that the top 1% of the richest people in the world was causing almost as many emissions as those on the bottom 50%. So it's really important that we see climate change as linked to not only by itself in isolation and not only as part of the environment, but as part of a wider conversation around ensuring that resources are allocated to those in need and that they're used efficiently.
Thank you, Francisco, and everybody else. Those are really good. If anyone's got any extra questions, chat them in the chat, and we've got some. So I'll start from the top. I wonder if this is something that we can go around our panelists and answer. Just maybe keep it brief, guys, because we've got a few more. This is from someone anonymous who I'm just going to read the first part of your question. Thank you for sending it in. How do you remain hopeful and committed to continued climate action? Catherine, do you want to start?
Oh, that is such an important question. Thank you very much for sending it in. This is something that I struggle with every day. I mean, my job and my life passion is about understanding what's going on. And when you hear how much bad news is out there, it's easy to get overwhelmed and to feel discouraged. And I think part of that also gets reinforced by how it's reported by the media, because people tend to report a climate disaster without the information about what you can actually do about it. And then they report the costs of taking action without underpinning why it's so important that we take action. And I think what gives me hope is that there is so much that we can actually do to address climate change. And so I keep my focus very firmly on the solutions. There is so much that we can do to transform our energy systems, our food systems, our transport systems. And there's so much that we can transform in terms of how we take care of each other and how we care for our future generations as well. So I think that's that hope that there's so much that we can do, and drives me. The other thing is knowing that it helps. You know, this is not an either or for the future. It's like every fraction of a degree that we can prevent helps. And so I just choose to focus on the solutions, and that's what keeps me going. So I look forward to hearing the other answers.
Thank you, Catherine. I think that's what a lot of us are talking about here at the Commission as well. Ben, what about you? How do you remain hopeful and committed?
Such a good question. Such a good question. And certainly, I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with it. I think for me, one thing is that climate change is being driven by humans, which means that humans can undo it. It's not this inevitable natural thing. We have built a world that's led to this. We can build a world that is different as well. And sometimes we can think, oh, it's hard to imagine what that is like. But there are examples all around us across the world where there are communities and societies living in ways that are in balance with nature, that are not driving climate change. There's a long history of that. We just need to look around and see that. You know, in New Zealand, you know, iwi Māori have been doing this for hundreds of years. You know, it's not a far-fetched concept of how we can live differently. It's out there. And then the third point is I just take hope from my friends. You know, I have so many friends who are out there who are smart, who are courageous, who are working their butts off on this, and that gives me hope. At the end of the day, if we have to be hopeful, because the only way to do this is to move forward, and so to me, there's also no other choice. So for me, it's a combination of things, but I see every reason to be hopeful.
Nice. Francisco, I'm going to go to you next. How do you remain hopeful?
The way I remain hopeful is just by taking inspiration in the work that people at the front lines are doing. You know, like the Standing Rock defenders who in North Dakota whose courageous action helped delay like the oil pipelines. You know, in the front line, Indigenous and youth communities are taking lots of practical steps, and they have the knowledge on how we can reduce the emissions. So just by taking inspiration from young people and reminding, as Ben said, like this problem was caused by humans, and it's something that humans can fix. And you know, if you look at what's happening around the world, renewable energy is actually cheaper now than fossil-based energy. We know that that clean energy jobs generate 4 to 5 times as much as jobs in the fossil industry. So not only does taking climate action help the environment, it also helps our people by creating sustainable and good jobs, which will help people transition from those ones involved in the extraction of fossil fuels. Because, you know, if we're going to be transitioned to a more renewable future, we can't leave anyone behind, and that includes coal workers, that includes oil workers, and that includes, you know, people working in extractive industries. And, you know, that really gives me hope, that idea that a better world is just around the corner. 200 years ago, it would have seemed inconceivable that that we could abolish things like child labor, that, you know, that women would be allowed to vote. But now it's like, it would be weird to have like child slavery again, and it'd be weird to have women not voting. So, you know, progress is slow, but if we push hard for it, we can create better futures.
Bye, kia ora. Thank you, Francisco. Carly and Charlie, do you want to choose who goes first?
We were just saying that you took all our points, all our answers, but I think on a different angle, it's a really good question, and I think that it's something I personally struggle with, you know, almost every day. And I think, you know, as everyone said, that I think it feels like I've got no choice but to be hopeful, because you know, what's the point of creating this better world if we're not here to enjoy it? And so I think that for me, it's about channeling this anxiety and this kind of the hopelessness feelings. And, you know, for me, it's about waking up every morning and going to work and knowing that I'm trying to do my best along with my colleagues, as well as taking inspiration from everyone on the front line, but in different parts of work, who are also trying to reduce climate change. And that doesn't mean working here. It could mean being a volunteer. It could mean working in lots of different parts of the economy. So I think for me, it's just about redirecting my focus and kind of just focusing on what we can do, knowing that every bit does count.
Yeah, I kind of echo what everyone said, but it is really easy to get frustrated and sort of despair at things in the world. I definitely do that on a regular basis, but I think it's, as we said, it's important not to get bogged down in that and think of the things that we can do to make a change. And like Catherine said, all the solutions are there. There are things that we can do already. So I think I was saying to Carly before, but I don't know if anyone's seen the David Attenborough documentary on Netflix, but I think that's a really good way of sort of, it shows the changes that have happened in the world due to technology and what people have done over the last 100 years or so, and how much things have changed. But it ends on a really positive note and saying there are things that we can do to make it better, and the solutions are there. It's just about adopting them and, yeah, taking them up.
Thanks guys. That was good. That's a really good question. We've got a couple more that I'm going to ask. So this question says, what opportunities do you see coming out of our response to climate change? And I'm just going to pick one person to answer this one. Catherine, actually, I think that's a good one for you.
There are so many opportunities that come out of how we address climate change. I think a really significant one is transitioning toward renewable energy from fossil fuel energy. I think fossil fuel energy, while it's produced a lot of energy in the past, I think it's had a lot of negative impacts as well on air pollution, on quality of life, and now on climate change. And if we can transition into renewable energy sources that are that work better for society, and I think that'll be a really big positive that comes out. I think this is also an opportunity for us to take a look at how we deliver energy to buildings and how the buildings use them, and make the most efficient use possible of the resources that we have. So maybe we can improve people's quality of life in their homes, in their workplaces, and in the transport system, and looking at how we can try to remedy some of the challenges our society has today by the actions that we take to produce a lower emission and more climate resilient future and coming up. I think those are the types of opportunities that I really get excited about, and I think there really are opportunities here, and also for innovation and changes also in the heart level about how we relate to each other and how we care about each other. So I think there's lots of opportunities for change. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to give this one to you, Ben. People have been fighting for climate action for a long time. Do you think there will be a societal shift large enough to reach our targets? You're on mute. Oh, yeah, good boy.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, are we going to reach our targets? I think that we will. I think for me, the question is, because the effects of climate change will come thick and fast. And I think as those become more and more evident, things will change. We will adapt. The question for me is kind of not, will there be a change to meet the targets to eventually address this problem? For me, the question is when? Will we do it soon enough or early enough to avoid the worst of those effects, or are we going to wait until it's so late that we feel the worst of it and then kind of react and change as a result of that? And it will happen. The challenge for us is to have some wisdom, have some foresight, and to make that change happen earlier, so that we can take advantage of all those opportunities that Catherine was outlining, as well as avoiding those other negative consequences. Humans do adapt and do a change to these things that happen, but it's on us to show the leadership and have the courage to act sooner, act earlier, to avoid the worst of those effects. But we will do it.
Thanks, Ben. Well, we've got you, you're mute. Oh, I've got another question directly for you from Steve Green, who asks, are there any countries that are far more advanced in their climate change movement, and what can we learn from them?
Yeah, I think there's so much to be learned, both from looking within New Zealand at parts of New Zealand that are doing different things, and looking at other countries out there in the world. Every country is a unique set of circumstances. We can say, oh, New Zealand's different, but every country is different, and there's no country that has this totally solved, but many different countries separately have done really great things on different parts of the solution. A country, for example, like Costa Rica in Central America has done incredible efforts to reforest the country and restore a lot of degraded land into native forest through a combination of working together with landowners and devising good policy and financial incentives to reforest a lot of their land. And I think that's something New Zealand can definitely take a lot of inspiration from, in terms of rebuilding some of our native forests, as well as working together with landowners. Whereas other countries, such as those in Scandinavia, have really taken the next leap with electric vehicle sales, which are now going through the roof, and have plans to phase out fossil fuel vehicles. And so we can look to that part of the world for inspiration there. So there's no one place that can give us all the answers, but it has to be a collaborative effort across borders, where we can draw on the work being done, and hopefully other countries will be looking to us to draw on the things that we start to do really well as well.
Got it. Thank you, Ben. I've got a couple of questions actually, Catherine, for you on the climate emergency. So it'd be great if you could just say a few words on that. And one of them asks if we think that community organisations, for example, School Strike for Climate, 350 Org, Extinction Rebellion, can be given some credit for the current NZ climate change emergency declaration.
Oh, thanks very much for the question. Oh, I think that the climate activists and youth organizations who've been giving a powerful voice to why we need climate action are absolutely a contributing factor to where we've gotten on the Zero Carbon Act, to what's happening internationally, and then to New Zealand's most recent, declaration of a climate emergency. Given how our current government systems are set up right now, young people have a voice but don't have a vote, and future generations don't even have a voice. And the countless species that we're driving to extinction through climate change don't have any say in this process as well. And I just have a lot of respect and gratitude for people who are helping to bring that voice into decision making in government and help to make that that action imperative. I think the term climate emergency means different things to different people. And I think we saw that in the political responses to the climate emergency declaration. I respect the diversity of views that were expressed on that. To me, what this gets to at the heart is we need climate action, and that action has to start now. And some people can call that an emergency. Maybe some people call that something else, and that's okay. But what matters is the action that we take. And this is it's a difficult thing to look at, because this is an emergency that's going to last for decades. And sometimes that's really hard to get our heads around it, because that's not how we've used the term emergency in the past. And there are also people who say, well, if we don't act now, we've lost the battle. And that's actually not the full story. It's like, if we want to have the most effective path, we've got to bend the curve now. That makes a huge difference. But even if we don't manage to bend it as far as we want, there's still hope for the future. It's not like the world is over. There's still steps that we can take. They just become more difficult and more expensive and more disruptive. So we've got choices and consequences in what we do. And, to me, whatever we do that helps us to take the right action urgently is a good thing.
Nice. Thank you, Catherine. I've got a question here for you, Francisco. A couple, actually. So one is, how much work is going on to move to circular economy from linear economy, and any concrete steps taken? I guess it's not, that's a little bit outside our job, but perhaps you could just talk a bit about whether you've looked at it.
Yeah, a lot of work is going, I think is starting, not specifically from us, but by the wider government, looking at the potential of a circular economy. But the first step to getting that is making sure we can measure things in the first place. A lot of the waste data in New Zealand is really bad and really fragmented. For example, we don't even know, we know how much waste ends up in municipal landfill, but we don't necessarily know how much waste is generated across New Zealand overall. So knowing how much waste is, generated in the first place, so we can quantify like what gets reduced, is like a really important step. After that, people can have a look at how we can start transitioning things to it. And, there's work that's going alongside that supports that. For example, the recent change to the waste levy, which increased the price of it for the first time in nearly a decade, is a good step forward, because that means that recycling operators can compete with landfills, and it'll make more sense for people to recycle rather than throwing things away. So, there's a lot of positive movement in this direction. More needs to happen, but I'm really optimistic about the potential of a circular economy being realized here in Aotearoa.
Thank you. Cool. I'm going to go down to this one. And I think, so we've got 18 minutes left, so I'm going to try and get through the questions we've got. Some of them are quite specific and technical. So if I haven't answered your question, it might be because of that, and I'm going to ask some people who are experts in the different areas to look at those, and we'll come back to you with the answers. we're trying to keep everything here broad, and we might not have the specific experts in the room. So one question here is, what is the best thing you can do when you're still a student without any recognised qualifications to actively engage in climate action beyond individual lifestyle choices, i.e. being vegan, taking public transport, driving EVs, etc. Carly, do you want to, and Charlie, do you guys want to take a start with that one?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it's obviously, it's hard when you're into the job market, I guess, but I think just being an advocate for climate action is a huge start, like actually being aware of it and making those conscious decisions to change things and being involved with different groups, and I think there are always ways you can get involved like that as well.
So second that, being an advocate, I think, is the first step. Going vegetarian and vegan are steps too, but we recognise that those choices might not be available for everyone. Neither is cycling. But when you can take those steps, actively choosing to do those steps is really good. And I think we're a panel of kind of people who've studied climate change, but I think that you don't need to have studied science and climate change to be part of the solution. So that's just another something I'd like to emphasise.
Yeah, well, I can definitely, because I don't have a background in science at all, but I think it's just being part of those conversations with your friends and families and encouraging the right thing with them is a really huge step, because I've personally found that really helpful, learning from different people about what should be done, because I didn't really know too much about it prior to this.
One last thing I'll add is just that I think that we can make a real difference in how we choose to spend our money and how we spend our time. So I think acknowledging that there are limited choices sometimes, but the ways in which we spend our money and the ways in which we kind of choose to make these decisions reflects, if they can, reflect on our values, and trying to, we may not always have the opportunity, but making sure where we can to make those decisions that kind of are kind of low emissions or kind of drive climate action are small steps that we can all take.
Thank you. Has anyone else got anything to add to that?
Sure, I can jump in. I think, all of those steps at an individual level are great. And anything you can do at an individual level, you can do at a collective level with your friends, with your family, and you can begin to scale those things up from just yourself to others as well. And so you have that individual action, you have that community action, but there's also institutional action that I think everyone can do. Like, we're all citizens in this democracy. Even those of us who aren't old enough to be able to vote, we can all write to our MPs, to our councillors, to let them know how much we care about this and that we expect them to take action for this on our behalf. We employ the politicians. They are meant to be responsive to us, so we can, share our voice with them. And same with other institutions we're a part of. If you have a bank account, where is that money invested? Is that money being invested to support kind of further use of like fossil fuels and holding up something we need to transition from? Or are they actively using your money to perhaps support the kind of the transition that we want as well? So thinking about where our money is another one. And if you are a part of a university or a workplace, what is the workplace doing? How is it using energy efficient appliances? And other things like that, what's happening within the institutions you're a part of. So I think there's things that all of us can do at many levels, individual, community, and institutional. We can all be a part of this.
Got it. Thank you, Ben. I'm going to send this next question to Catherine with a caveat that unfortunately we didn't have Bevan here today, who's working on our Māori work stream. So, but Catherine on the board has talked to his team a lot. So we have a specific Māori work stream who are working really closely with Māori community and Māori business to see what opportunities and barriers lie, and to ensure that we have a Māori focus and lens over all our works. It's incredibly important to us. So Catherine, I guess the question is, what is the involvement with and implementation with Mātauranga Māori and Rangatahi Māori? And also asking, how are we addressing or thinking about te tiriti within our climate change work?
Oh, thank you very much for the question. That's really, really important question. First of all, upholding the principles of the Te Tiriti o Waitangi is encapsulated in the Zero Carbon Act itself and has been passed very firmly into the terms of reference for the Climate Change Commission. So this is a core part of our DNA as a Climate Change Commission, is to integrate the deep wisdom from Matauranga Māori and Te Ao Māori into how we think about climate change solutions, and also looking at from the process of how we take action in the future, how we set policies and how we implement those policies, what it means to take a partnership approach with iwi and Maori that it's consistent with the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. So our team has been working in consultation and in partnership with different people and organizations to try to explore what this means. It's going to be a long-term journey for the Commission on this, and it's one that we're starting now. We're starting with respectfully and with an open mind, and we'll continue to grow on this in the long term. Another important part of our work is looking at how the advice that we produce is going to impact on different people across the economy, and looking at the particular impacts on Māori is also a very important part of that work, that we understand those impacts and that we design solutions to help reduce and mitigate those impacts. And part of this work also is looking at how we can, grab those opportunities that I was talking about earlier to do things even better than we do now. So it's not just about, not, preventing further harm, but also about trying to actually remedy some of the situations that we find ourselves in now. So it's a really, really, really important part of our work stream, and one that's going to grow over time. I think for me, where I personally am growing the most from this work and from what I'm learning from the team's work, is that we have to think of this as a whole system. I think in government policy, we tend to break things into little pieces, and actually this is a whole system that has to transform. And so that system approach, the thinking intergenerationally, how can we make policy that makes sense for today's people and for tomorrow's people, and balance those needs. I think that is really inherent in Te Ao Māori. And then this concept of guardianship, and what is our role as the kaitiaki for New Zealand, but also as part of guardianship for the world, about how much New Zealand contributes to the problem. So I think there's a really rich base from Matauranga Māori and Te Ao Māori that we're trying to draw into our work.
Kia ora, thank you, Catherine. While you've still got your camera on, I think this is another good question for you. Omar, I'm just going to read the end of your question because I think that it encapsulates the beginning. So what and how what can New Zealand as a small nation do in global change? Or what action can we take to put pressure on more powerful countries? This is a question we get asked a lot, isn't it?
Oh my goodness, it is. Yeah, people point to the fact that New Zealand emits 0.17% of global emissions and says, look, why should we have to do anything on climate change? And my first response to that is always that a pie has the same number of calories when you cut it into small pieces. Every little group of 5 million people can make a difference on climate change, and absolutely we have a role to play. I think first of all, we have a fundamental responsibility because the emissions that we produce have just as much damage for the climate as the emissions from any other country. And we need to take responsibility for that and try to reduce them, as quickly as we can. Beyond that, I think because we are an agile, innovative, creative country, we can actually help to develop solutions here and experiment and implement them more quickly than a lot of other bigger countries can. And that makes us a fantastic place to learn. And I think that as we develop new insights on how to move toward a mostly renewable electricity system with heavy use of electric vehicles, as we look at how we transform food production systems, I think those breakthroughs in thinking and in systems and in policy design can have a global ripple effect and help to inspire other countries to take change if we can show them how to lead the way. So I think we actually could do a lot to make a difference on climate change, and I'm excited that we're committed to trying to do that.
Thank you, Catherine. I've got a question here from Bruce, and I'm going to just ask it, and whoever wants to answer, jump in. possibly you, Francisco. So how do we reconcile that while recognising that businesses are going to aim to maximise profits and addressing consumer demand can often be regressive in nature? So I think that's about how, what are we going to do while businesses are constantly trying to maximise profits and address demand that maybe isn't helpful to us?
Shall I dive in on that one?
Go for it.
Francisco, if you feel inspired, that's okay. I'm happy to give it a go.
I'll put in some initial thoughts and then you can add stuff in. I think sometimes addressing some forms of consumption can be regressive in nature. So, for example, if you were just to try and reduce consumption by making things more expensive, that would be regressive. But, for example, if you shifted things to more durable and long-lasting products rather than requiring that people constantly are having to buy things that break all the time. And if you invest upfront in enabling low-income communities and being able to invest in durable, longer-lasting goods, not only will you create emission savings from people not having to buy as much stuff that breaks often frequently, but you'll also get the emissions, the savings from people not having to constantly buy stuff, as well as getting the emission savings from avoiding the consumption, the manufacturing, and the emissions from landfill of those goods. So, we can identify things that are win-wins and prioritize doing those and making sure that we're supporting low-income communities to transition to more sustainable consumption choices rather than necessarily forcing people to do things without supporting them, without enabling them to make those changes. Because we know everyone wants to transition to a low emissions future. It's just a matter of supporting everyone, particularly our most vulnerable.
Okay, so with 5 minutes, Catherine, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Oh, thank you. That was a great answer, Francisco. I'll just add, because I work on emissions trading, I think putting a price on greenhouse gas emissions is a critical part of this because it creates the right incentives for business innovation to go to work and create the solutions that we need on climate change. Right now, the true costs of greenhouse gas emissions just don't get factored into the decisions that businesses are making. And that means that our market signals are actually actively pushing us in the wrong direction. And we're acting like fossil fuels are a lot cheaper than they are. And so, to me, if we put those market signals in the right place, then it helps to drive the kind of transformation that we actually need in the long term. And, emission pricing helps innovators to compete and creates those clear signals. Now, that can have a regressive impact on low-income households, and there are things you can do about that. You can look at how the ETS revenue gets returned to communities to help them to adjust to those higher emission prices. So the goal here is to absolutely make sure that people's fundamental well-being needs get met while our market is sending the right signals for low emission innovation.
Good. Thank you, Catherine. I wish we could keep going. We've still got more questions, but we've only got 4 minutes. So we might look at doing some more of these. This is, as I said earlier, our first kind of step into talking to not only young people, but we've done a few of these. So jump onto our website or follow us on, we're on Twitter, and keep an eye out for what we've got coming out. We've also got a newsletter. So we'll send you an email after this. We've got all your email addresses and you can sign up to the newsletter. It'll tell you what else we've got going on. And we've definitely got plans in the new year to do some more kind of hearing from you and more, I guess, dynamic engagement. So before we close off, Charlie is just going to talk a bit about what we've got coming up for consultation, where you can start telling us what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. Charlie.
Yeah, so we're currently preparing our first package of advice to government on the steps Aotearoa could take to reach its climate goals. So on the 1st of February next year, we're going to publicly release our first package of advice for consultation. And so this means that for 6 weeks, you can have the chance to tell us what you think about our work and what Aotearoa should be doing to tackle climate change. We're running a digital consultation, so all the information will be on our website and social channels, and we'll be setting up a separate web page just for consultation, which we'll share all of our work and our thinking, so you'll be able to have a look through that. and you'll have opportunity to tell us what you think and what you think we should be doing. So yeah, like Harriet said, we'll be running more events like this, just to what you think is really important to us. So,
and yeah, please email us and tell us if there's a way you think that we should be consulting with young people or the groups that you represent. It's always really good to hear from people so that we can make sure that we're doing it in ways that work for everyone, because it's quite hard for us to think of everything. So any help, most appreciated. Cool. So I'm going to say another karakia to finish, and then I think we'll sign off. Sorry, it's just I didn't say it right. Okay. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, kia hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei Māori ora. Kia ora. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.